let me get all the hardware in order here. Is this the clicker? That's, okay, but I don't touch that.
It's the...
Dale stole it. Thank you. Okay, so today I wanted to talk a little bit about open source hardware, and this was an opportunity for me to reflect about what I think it is that's really important and wonderful, and also what it kind of isn't, and why it's useful for us to kind of pull those things apart. Let's see. Maybe I'll just do this. The slides don't seem to be advancing. Let's see. Okay. So the way that I thought that I would do that is by telling kind of 3 stories, recent stories from my own life about open source hardware, about kind of encountering it and experiencing it in kind of 3 different ways. So the first story is a story about computational design, and a story about how it is so cool to be able to move from source code into a physical object. So a few months ago, I had the great privilege of talking at an event with this wonderful woman, Margaret Wertheim, who's the leader of this project around hyperbolic geometry and how you can generate kind of hyperbolic geometries using traditional textile techniques, namely crochet and knitting. So this is an example of this beautiful hyperbolic surface that was crocheted. So she runs these exhibitions called the Hyperbolic Coral Crochet Reef that are gorgeous. I had known about her work for some time, but hearing her speak about it just completely got me infatuated. And I just loved these forms, and I wanted to do something with them myself. And being a computationally oriented person, I was especially interested in modeling them and understanding them computationally. So the first thing that I did along this path is, I think, what all of you would do in a similar circumstance, which is go to the internet and see how other people had tackled kind of modeling these forms computationally. And lo and behold, miraculous and kind of wonderful thing, there's all of this open source software out there that I was able to find that models these surfaces computationally. And so I downloaded a bunch of those and looked at them, and I kind of found different ways you could model these shapes and so on. My favorite of those examples was this program written by Karen Jeffries and Patrick Stein. So what you see here is a kind of a snapshot from open processing. So this application is up on open processing if you want to play with it. But this is a snapshot. Here on the right, you can see one of those hyperbolic surfaces that is generated by their code, and on the left, the actual source code. So I downloaded this, and I tinkered with different parameters, and I slowly kind of began to understand kind of how they were thinking about things and how they were doing things. And I learned through this process that essentially their model was relying on these 2 additional kind of open source libraries for processing, namely a physics library that was written by Jeffrey Traer Bernstein, that I hadn't encountered before. So exploring this shape led me to then explore this new physics library for processing, which was super cool and really powerful, and I've since gone on to use in additional projects. It was also my first encounter with an STL export library for processing. It was written by a wonderful designer who I admire greatly, Marius Watts. So through exploring this piece of source code that I found out online, I not only kind of got this new vision into a computational model of this gorgeous shape, but I learned these new tools which have then been really useful for me in other projects. The final step in this exploration for me, though, was after I kind of tinkered with their code and adjusted it a bit to get exactly kind of some shapes that were appealing to me. I then sent that shape off to the excellent Shapeways, and for $5, kind of miraculous, $5, I got this super cool object back in the mail that I love, that's totally unique, totally personal, and that I incorporate in my day-to-day life now. So for me, this is a story about how open source hardware and open source software and that integration can be this wonderful scaffolding, this wonderful platform to encourage kind of personal expression, personal exploration, learning. So I learned a tremendous amount through this kind of passion-driven exploration. And then ultimately, for the production of these unique, strange, kind of personal objects that have meaning and utility in our lives. So wonderful open source hardware experience here. Okay, on to a second example. This is an example that's a little bit more utilitarian and also a little bit more frustrating, but there's a very nice glimmer of hope. So, as some of you know, I grew up in the beautiful middle of nowhere in northern New Mexico. This is kind of what it looks like where I grew up, New Mexico. I have a lot of friends who still live there, and many of them live off the grid, which means they kind of get their power like this. So many of them have these kind of solar systems that generate all of the electricity that they need for their homes. And they're all kind of DIY hackers, kind of constantly grappling with what that means and how they can do it better. It turns out that I tend to be often an electronics kind of consultant for lots of my friends. And sometimes I can be really helpful, and this is super gratifying. So recently, this was a project where I got to feel like Superwoman because they were like, oh, this thing is broken. I was like, aha, it's that fuse there, and we can just order you a replacement fuse and pop it back in, and all will be good. And we did it, and it worked, and they were, astonished, and I was, it was awesome. But then there are unfortunate incidents like the following. So a couple of months ago, my friend's inverter just stopped working. So he has this particular model of inverter which converts the DC energy produced by the solar panels into kind of AC energy that he uses in his house to run different standard appliances. And it just stopped working. So everything was kosher, kind of coming in from the solar panel and battery side, but there was no kind of AC signal coming at the other end of this inverter. And so he calls me up and he asks for my help in like troubleshooting and potentially fixing this problem. So I go over and we kind of open it up, and it's a circuit board, right? And I don't know a lot about inverters, actually. I know a little bit about electronics. Countless of you know so much more than I do about electronics, but we kind of look at this thing. And I was like, well, I'm not really sure where to start. We checked a couple of obvious things. But I bet we can find the plans for this guy online. And with the plans, we could check a bunch more things, and that'll be a great place to start. So I go to the internet and I look for information about this inverter, seeing if I can find schematics or, ideally kind of hardware diagrams. And I search for this thing, and I find nothing. So no schematics and no diagrams. There's kind of a user manual, but that's not terribly helpful. And I dig a little deeper, kind of thinking, this solar DIY space is pretty hackery anyway. You would think that they would have plans for these things. As I dig a little bit deeper, it becomes apparent not only do they not have plans available, but this is a very deliberate strategy by this particular manufacturer and the people who repair these devices to kind of keep that information hidden, so that in exactly this situation, you wouldn't kind of try to fix it yourself. You would instead go to the repair shop and kind of have them fix it for you. So this was a frustrating encounter where it seemed like to start to think about repairing this device, I would actually have to reverse engineer it first. So there wasn't much, unfortunately, that I could do to help my friend, and I just felt like, dang, this is a case where I really want open source hardware. Where are you? So the moral of this story for me was, if I build my kind of off-the-grid house, I'm totally going to use the inverter schematics and plans that were developed by the Global Village Construction Kit people, the open source ecology project, which is awesome. They have plans, so don't get that inverter. Get one that you can actually kind of access the files for if you're contemplating a similar project. But I think there are lots of spaces like this where we can benefit tremendously from open source hardware. All right, so I have one more story for you, and I'll try to make this quick. So this is a slightly different kind of story. And this is where I kind of put on my curmudgeonly side. So this is a kind of hyperbolic curmudgeonly tale. This is a tale about the LilyPad Arduino. So this is a project that I've been working on for several years now in collaboration with the awesome SparkFun people. This is a construction kit for sewing electronics into your clothes. So I developed this several years ago as an Arduino derivative. And it's an open source hardware project, so you can download all of the hardware source files for this. Why did I choose to do this as an open hardware project? Why did I choose to do this as an Arduino project? Well, these, frankly, are the reasons. I made this an Arduino project because Arduino provided to me wonderful, wonderful software that was easy for other people to use. That software was also open source, so I could tinker with the Arduino software and kind of get it to work really nicely with my hardware. The Arduino community, as you all know, is also just fantastic. There's great documentation, great people out there writing libraries, great community support, online forums. Just the community component is awesome. So no-brainer to try to plug this project into the Arduino project. However, the fact that Arduino is open source hardware had essentially nothing to do with my decision to make this an Arduino project. So, you know, open source hardware just wasn't part of this picture at all, even though I was making a hardware derivative of Arduino. So you might say, okay, well, yeah, but what about now that the LilyPad Arduino is an open source hardware project? Isn't that giving something valuable back to the open source hardware community? I would say that the fact that the LilyPad hardware designs are open source essentially means almost nothing. So what the LilyPad is like a round breakout board for an AT mega chip, right? So if you happen to want a round breakout board for an AT mega chip, it'll save you like an hour or two of like tinkering with Eagle. But it's essentially not really important at all. The fact that LilyPad is open source hardware is mostly meaningless. And I would argue, and here comes the really kind of curmudgeonly point, that this is true for a huge percentage of what we cite as really wonderful and important about open source hardware. That a lot of this, it really doesn't matter at all that it's open source hardware. So what's the moral of these stories, these three stories? The point that I want to make is I think that open source hardware is tremendously, tremendously important and tremendously, tremendously powerful, but that we should be thoughtful and honest in our assessment of why and where it's tremendously important and tremendously powerful. And we should not pat ourselves on the back too much for making choices that are really easy, but essentially not terribly impactful. So I'll leave it at that. Thank you very much. And A quick shout out to my student, Jennifer Jacobs, who has a wonderful demo out in the lobby. You should come check that out.